Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Well, guess what? It's a special day today. Not just because we're doing How Did Russia Become an Empire number 15. I got an American brewed craft beer advent calendar. So, can you see that? This is number 1. Let's see what I'm going to be drinking for this video, shall we? Gotta be smarter than the box, apparently. Let me set it down. Okay. Come on. Seriously? You gotta work with me here. You can't make holes and then make the beer smaller than the hole. There you go. American Wheat Ale. All right, well, I'm going to crack this bad boy open. 5% alcohol. I'm going to call that bluff right now. Cheers and video time after I take a drink. It tastes like a... Wow, it's really full. It tastes like a slight, little bit of a Sam Adams. It's kind of really bitter, but it's pretty good. Apologies for the celebration video.
Survive a combined land and sea-based blockade. However, facing the combined Danish, Saxon, Russian army was not a feasible option either. In autumn, the Allied forces split up into two, so that one part could raid Mecklenburg. In the end, he decided on the latter option. Peter was in Dresden at the time, recovering from an illness. He was already furious because of the lack of coordination between the Allied commanders, and after hearing of Stenbock advancing towards Mecklenburg, he ordered his forces to engage in a pursuit without him. Stenbock advanced quickly, much faster than the Russian Saxon armies did. On the 3rd of December, the Danish army encamped for winter quarters southwest of Wismar, near the town of Gadebusch. The Swedish army arrived at Wernau on the 14th, and by the 18th, they were already at Brusewitz, merely 10 kilometers away from the Danish army.
Question: how long ago did we as people in the middle of a war, when did we stop camping? In camping for winter quarters? When did we just decide, now we're not doing that anymore? Because I don't think we did that. Did we do that during World War I? I mean, no, of course not. We fought during the winter. I wonder when that changed. Because I know the Civil War, the American Civil War, we would... Did we? I don't know if we did. Huh. If anyone has any idea, I could look it up, but that's nah.
At that point, the Russian army was south of Lake Schwerin and could not provide any assistance. Only a small Saxon cavalry detachment arrived to aid the Danish by the eve of the battle. Stenbock knew that any delay would be detrimental to his cause, so he marched his army through a snowstorm, arriving on the other side of the river on the morning of the 20th.
They're ready
Jobst
for you.
von Scholtens, the leader of the Danish army, placed his forces behind a river and dense marshland near the village of Falkenstedt. The strong Danish defensive position made their leaders believe that the Swedes would turn south and try to cross the river at a safer point before attacking. After reconnaissance, however, Stenbock concluded that their only chance of victory would be through a full frontal assault. The Allied army was around 17,000 strong, with 8,000 Danish infantrymen, 5,000 cavalry, along with another 4,000 Saxon horsemen. The Swedish army had about 12,500 men, with 6,500 footmen and 6,000 cavalry. Both sides placed their infantry in the center and their cavalry on the flanks.
Did he say fitmen? And okay, footmen and then cavalry. Okay, sorry.
The Swedes had 30 cannons, while the Danish had 14. Jobst von Scholten led the Danish army, Jakob von Flemming led the cavalry on the left flank. Stenbock led the Swedish army.
Jakob.
At 1 PM, the Swedish artillery opened fire, and the rest of their troops advanced. The Swedes were using a new type of cannon, which was more mobile and precise than the Danish artillery. Their artillery barrage not only managed to cover the advance of their troops, but also dealt heavy casualties to the Danish forces. The Swedish infantry advanced towards the Danish position through a narrow clearing. Adhering to the Karolian tactics, they advanced until they could discern their enemy's facial features and fired several devastating volleys. The Danish infantry returned fire, however it was not precise. Scholtens attempted to break the Swedish centre with a cavalry attack from the right. This attack failed due to precise Swedish volleys, as well as artillery barrages, and the cavalry retreated after suffering significant casualties. Afterwards, the Swedish left attacked the winded Danish right. This forced Scholten to wheel his entire army to the left to avoid being outflanked. Simultaneously, the Swedish cavalry on the right managed to find a small path through the marsh and attacked. The Danish left was caught completely by surprise and began retreating because of the relentless Swedish assault. The Allied army, though in a strong defensive position, was suffering from disorganization. Flemming, the leader of the Danish forces on the left, requested that the cavalry which was kept behind Wackenstedt be brought to the front on the morning of the battle. Scholten acquiesced, however his order came in late, and those cavalry regiments were caught behind the Danish left during the retreat. As they were unprepared for battle and caught in a position where maneuvering was difficult, disorder broke loose within their ranks. They were pushed back to Wackenstedt, where brutal fighting ensued. The quick and precise Swedish assault along the entire front pushed the Danish army back, and some units began routing. Unable to save their left flank, Flemming and Scholtens retreated behind Wackenstedt and formed a new defensive line there. The Swedish left once again assaulted the Danish right. However, they were fired upon by the Danish Royal Guard and lost some of their momentum. Nevertheless, the Danish right almost broke, and Flemming had to reinforce it with his Saxon cavalry. The Saxons managed to stabilize the line. However, their attempts to push the Swedes back were unsuccessful. The Royal Guard still continued firing at the Swedish cavalry, causing many casualties. This forced
Wouldn't you be causing casualties though on both sides if they're that close and entangled? Aren't you risking shooting your own people? Or am I just a fool? I would swear you'd be, you'd never want to fire even in the direction of your own people. Let alone, you got to be if they're close quarter fighting like that, hell no, I wouldn't trust anyone. I wouldn't trust the Lord, him or herself. I'd be like, point the gun somewhere else. What's wrong with you? Drop kick them if I had to. I'm talking about the Lord.
Stenbock to send his elite infantry regiments to fight them, and the two sides engaged in a brutal melee. This engagement was eventually won by the Swedes, and the Danish centre began to retreat. The Saxons, though unable to defeat the Swedish left, fought fiercely and ensured that their enemies could not pursue the retreating forces. Most of the troops on the Danish left were either killed or captured, and only a few soldiers managed to retreat with the rest of the army. In the end, the Danish army lost all of their artillery and about 6,500 men, most of whom were captured, while the Swedes lost 1,500. Although this battle was a tactical success for Stenbock's army, it proved to be strategically insignificant. The Danish army was not completely broken, and the Russians and Saxons still had overwhelming numerical superiority. Furthermore, the Swedish army was no longer within the safety of Stralsund's walls, and marching back would be a risky move. A lack of supplies also began to take its toll on them, and to make matters worse, the Baltic Sea was still frozen, so resupplying by ship was not an option. Stenbock subsequently moved west with his army, trying to extort funds and supplies out of the Danish-controlled city of Altona. When the citizens failed to meet the overwhelming demands, the Swedish army burned the city to the ground. The army headed east afterwards. However, it was surrounded by a large Russian-Saxon force nearby Turning. Breaking his neutrality, Charles Frederick of Holstein-Gottorp provided refuge to the Swedish army inside his fort, as with the Spanish War of Succession nearly over, the Duke expected aid from Great Britain and the United Provinces, just like in 1700. Their ships never arrived, and with hunger and disease running rampant throughout his army, Stenbock surrendered on the 13th of May. Having lost another army, Charles seemed to be in dire straits, with defeat being an increasingly realistic option. The Allied powers were more than willing to make peace with Sweden. Charles, adamant that he would not relinquish even an inch of land, refused even the most lenient offers. With the king so headstrong and averse to defeat, it became evident that war-weary Sweden would not sue for peace, at least not while Charles XII was still breathing. With Sweden's final great continental army neutralized, Peter I of Russia was finally able to retire to his new capital and enjoy his favorite pastime, the navy. The commander of the Russian army in Germany, Menshikov, had no time to celebrate after his victory. He besieged Sweden's 3 strongholds once again, and extorted a large sum of money from the city of Hamburg as punishment for aiding the Swedes. The Tsar would use that money to purchase several state-of-the-art ships from the Dutch. Even though he was winning on all fronts, Peter wished to make peace as soon as possible. Continuous wars had a devastating effect on Russia, and the threat of a new war with the Ottomans was looming. To his joy, however, Charles had been arrested by the Sultan for conspiracy, and Crimean raids were becoming increasingly rare. This allowed him to focus on Sweden's final frontier, Finland. With new troops and resources, Admiral Apraksin was able to swiftly advance into southern Finland. The new Russian navy played a pivotal role during the Finnish campaign, as supply shortages were the main cause of Russian failures there after the capture of Viborg. Peter refused to risk the expensive Dutch ships of the line for such operations, instead opting to use the much larger and easily replaceable galley fleet. By transporting his men behind the Swedish army, Peter was able to force General Liebecker to retreat several times, until he was finally replaced by a more capable commander. On the 8th of May 1713, a large Russian army was able to land near Helsinki. The Swedes, now under the command of Armfelt, managed to defend the city for some time. In the end, the size of the Russian army proved to be too much for the small Swedish force, and Armfelt ordered a retreat to Porvoo, though not before burning Helsinki and all of its supplies. In September, the Russian army captured Turku, thereby securing the entire southern coast of Finland. Around the same time, one of Sweden's strongholds in Pomerania, Stettin, fell as well. The city was immediately given to the Prussians, who did not have to fire a single bullet in the conflict. Stralsund and Wismar still held strong, however the Allied noose was tightening around them. At this point, the Swedish government in Stockholm did not view Finland as an important theatre in the war. Therefore, very little was done to combat the Russian fleet's dominance in the area, and Armfelt had to rely only on local recruits for his small army. After the fall of Turku, Armfelt placed his army in a defensive position near the next great Finnish city on the Russian warpath, Tampere. In October, he faced a 5 times larger Russian army at the Battle of Pelikkene. Armfelt took up defensive positions with his troops on an isthmus near Tampere, between the lakes of Palkanivesi and Malavesi.
Isthmus.
He had approximately 3,700 men under his command, with 2,200 footmen and 1,500 cavalry, together with 28
It's not a very big army.
light field guns. The cavalry was placed a bit further from the rest of the troops, near the village of Malkila. Apraxin made his base in a village on the other side of the isthmus. His army numbered 14,000 men and 22 guns. The main Russian army was split in two halves, one led by Bruce and another by Golovin. 3 squadrons were also prepared especially for an amphibious assault, and they were led by Golitsyn. The battle started on the morning of the 17th of October.
Is this some kind of fortification all along here, I'm guessing? I'm going to say yes.
Apraxin realized immediately that the well-entrenched Finnish army was in an excellent defensive position. A frontal attack under such circumstances would have been extremely costly. Therefore, he opted to send Golitsyn's amphibious assault units to the west side of the isthmus, while the main force feigned a full frontal assault. At the time when they reached the land near Malkila, the Finnish cavalry were still in their quarters. When they finally attacked Golitsyn's men, it was already too late, as the prepared Russian soldiers repulsed them with ease. On the east side of the isthmus, Russian troops repeatedly tried to cross the river. However, they were beaten back with heavy losses each time. The mounting pressure on that side of the battlefield did have its purpose, as it diverted attention away from Golitsyn's force. At the beachhead, increasing numbers of Russian troops started gathering. To combat this, Armfeldt sent his reserves there. The infantry performed well and killed many Russians. Nevertheless, the subpar performance of the Finnish cavalry proved critical for this battle. It did not take long for the Russian soldiers to rout them, and the infantry, heavily outnumbered, was forced to retreat.
It's funny how it's like dominoes. When one unit or person, even person, retreats, or just then the person next to him is like, and it's just this, as I say, a domino effect of one person and then 2, then 3, then 5, 10, and the whole thing is just gone. Everyone is just running, and it's just, excuse me, you're just fighting and hoping that it's not your side that's going to be the one that has to run. Because that's what it seems like you're doing. You're just waiting for one person next to you or across from you to turn and run. And all that does is boost the morale of the other side. It's just crazy.
With the disorderly retreat of their western flank, the rest of the Finnish army risked being surrounded. Armfeldt also realized this and ordered the rest of the army to retreat. The soldiers there, emboldened by their success, refused to do so. It was only when the Russian cavalry crossed that they were persuaded to flee. Because of the delay, it was possible for the Russian cavalry to harass the retreating soldiers, forcing them to leave most of their artillery behind. Still, the Finnish army lived to fight another day, since they managed to retreat with minimal casualties. They lost around 800 men, while the Russian army suffered a similar number of losses.
One unit had, what was it, 3,500, 2,500 and 3,000 people maybe, less than 3,000. And the other one had 12,000. So if you lose 800 on the 12,000 side, that sucks. But man, if you lose 800 on 2,500 or 3,000, yeah, it's not good.
The two armies met once again at Napue in February 1714. This time around, the Finnish army was decisively defeated. Armfeldt retreated with the remnants of his army to Sweden proper, leaving Finland at the mercy of the Russian occupier. Peter had absolutely no ambition of conquering Finland, and viewed it merely as a bargaining chip to be used to strengthen his position at the negotiating table once the Swedes were actually willing to negotiate. Until then, the land would be thoroughly ravaged in what became known as the Greater Wrath or the Great Hatred. Until the end of the war, Russian soldiers would commit innumerable atrocities in Finland. Looting, rape, torture and murder were widespread, and a large number of Finns were forced to move inland. The Finns also engaged in guerrilla warfare, prompting further retaliation from the Russians. Thousands of men were taken as slaves to St. Petersburg to be used as forced labor in Peter's dockyards or on his many architectural projects. Many children were taken from their homes as well to be used as future soldiers and sailors. The plague had also struck Finland during the occupation, further devastating the area. As in Finland the Russians were at Sweden's doorstep, the ruling council finally decided to ramp up their efforts in the eastern Baltic. A strong Swedish navy under Admiral Vetrang was finally sent to Finland. With their navy unable to enter the Gulf of Bothnia, Russian troops in the areas north of Turku began suffering from supply shortages. The land-based supply routes were slow and insecure, forcing the Russians to divert further resources to the area, resources that Peter would have wanted to use elsewhere. In spring, the Russians finally decided to try to sail by the coast of western Finland. However, a small Swedish force sank most of their ships. In May.
Okay.
Have you ever tried those CBD products and it did nothing for you? Sure, CBD products are good for some people in some uses, but it really doesn't.
In May, Vatrang sailed towards Revel to see if he could capture the city. Upon seeing the improved coastal batteries in the area and several Russian ships of the line moored in the port, he decided that it would be foolish to attempt any kind of assault on the city. Meanwhile, Apraxin sailed from Kronstadt with a large fleet, hoping to tempt Vatrang into a naval encounter in the shallow coastal seas. The two navies met near Cape Hanko on the 29th of June. Although numerically superior, the Russians had far weaker ships than their Swedish counterparts, and their sailors were less experienced. Knowing that his galleys would be decimated in the open sea, Apraxin withdrew all of his ships east of the peninsula, where he awaited further reinforcements from Helsinki. He also informed Peter, who was in Revel, of the situation, and requested that he bring all of the Russian ships of the line with him. Peter joined Apraxin on the 20th of July. However, he deemed the odds too unfavourable to bring his new ships. Galleys had one specific advantage in shallow seas compared to ships of the line. They depended on rowing and could move even when there was no wind. As Golitsyn and his men were now suffering from severe supply troubles, it was imperative for the Russian fleet to reach Turku as soon as possible. Peter's initial idea was to transport the galleys over the Hanko Isthmus.
All right, well, we're going to end this here. We're going to get ready for the final battle. That was a good one. American Wheat Ale. It doesn't say who it was. The company. Produced by Minez Craft Brewery, Monroe, Wisconsin. MINHAS brewery.com, one word. It's not bad. Okay, we're going to end this here. Like and subscribe, or Tooth Fairy won't deliver Christmas presents.